Okay, now we're going to go over taxonomy. So don't confuse taxonomy with taxidermy. This is very different. So taxonomy is how we name, organize, and classify all living things. All right? And you guys have probably seen this before in biology class. These are the levels of classification. So domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And now I'm adding a new one here, strain. Strain is mostly used for bacteria. This is when there's multiple species, they're all the same species, such as E. coli, but there may be some slight differences in the DNA, so we classify them into their own strain. So for example, there's E. coli in our gut that are totally harmless and they're part of our normal flora, but then there's also strains of E. coli that can cause severe food poisoning, so these would be strain. And an easy way to remember this is, did King Philip come over for good soup? All right. So now a little bit more about these levels of classification. So I'm going to show you an example here. This is an example of levels. So you can see here, kingdom. Humans here are in the same kingdom as a sea star. But you guys know we're not very closely related to sea star. We're also in the same kingdom as dogs and mountain gorilla. Now the further you go down in this list, so the further I go down, the more closely related we become. So we are much more closely related to other members of the same family than we are in members of the same order. Let's go back down here and I can show you. All right, so we are much more closely related to mountain gorilla than we are to the lemur. And we're much more closely related to mountain gorilla than we are to dogs. So the further down you go, the more closely related we become. Now, one more important thing to talk about in the levels of classification. Up here, we're going to talk about the domains real quick. So the domains of life. There are actually only 3 domains of life. Okay, the first are the bacteria. The second are the archaea. And the third are the eukarya, or you can also say the eukaryotes. Okay? Bacteria and archaea are both prokaryotes. Remember, prokaryotes have no nucleus. They have no membrane-bound organelles. And they're always going to be unicellular. Unicellular. Whereas the eukaryotes, okay, they have a nucleus. They have those membrane-bound organelles. They can be either unicellular or multicellular. They come in both packages. Okay? And we're going to talk more about these prokaryotic and eukaryotic microbes in another video. Phylogeny, this shows the relatedness between organisms. A lot of times what you're going to see is what's called a phylogenetic tree, like the one that's pictured here. Okay, so you can see here's the tree. It's kind of like a family tree. So here at the bottom, you can see bacteria and archaea originated first. These were the first forms of life. And from there, protists like algae and protozoa evolved. And from algae, plants evolved. And from protozoa, fungus and animals evolved. So this is kind of like the tree of life. The last thing I want to talk about in this video, this is very, very important, okay? And this is how we name the organisms, okay? So a fancy word for name is nomenclature. So nomenclature is the proper naming of all living organisms. Okay, so I'm going to come back to these pictures in a minute. I'm going to write down here. So whenever we're going to write the name of an organism, the genus name comes first, followed by the species name. And you guys have seen this before. For example, us humans, we are Homo, that's our genus, sapien. And I'm going to underline this, Homo sapien. Now there's a few rules when you're writing the name or typing the name of a living organism, okay? The first rule is the genus name comes first and the species name second. So genus first, species name is second. If there was going to be a strain, the strain name would come third. Second rule, as you can see, like I wrote here, the first letter of the genus name, the H here, is capitalized. So the first letter of the genus, if you were going to type it or write it, it's going to be uppercase, okay? Rule number 3, the rest of the genus name and all of the species name is lowercase. Okay, so the rest of the name is all lowercase. I'm going to make some more room here. All right, last rule, rule number 4, and this is the one everybody forgets, and I'm always going to take off 1 point for every time you forget this, all right? If you're typing, okay, like on a lab report, anytime you're typing on the computer, the full name needs to be in italics. If you're handwriting, okay, if you're writing it on a piece of paper, it's obviously very difficult to write in italics, so instead we're going to underline the full name. So if you go back here, you can see I underlined Homo sapiens. If I were going to type it, okay, remember I capitalized only the H here. So if I were to type it, make it a little bit bigger so you could see, I'm going to italicize it, all right? So in microbiology, you're going to see some really funny names, okay? So one of the names you're going to see a lot is E. coli. This is one that we use all the time. We're going to use it in lab, okay? E. coli. That E, okay, is the genus name. It actually is an abbreviation for Escherichia. Escherichia is the genus and coli is the species. And you might be wondering, where did this name come from? It actually was named after a scientist that discovered E. coli, Theodore Escherich. Here's a picture. So that's where the Escherichia comes from. The coli, this comes from colon because you have E. coli in your colon. All right, so that's one way. A couple ways we might name them. We might name them after the scientist, such as Escherich, or we might name after where discovered, such as the colon. Here's another example we're going to use a lot in this class. S. aureus this actually stands for Staphylococcus aureus. And it's another name like, whoa, where did this crazy name come from? Okay, so Staphylococcus means a cluster of little circles like this. And if you look at S. aureus under the microscope, that's what it looks like, a cluster of little circles. So that's another way we might name organisms, is what they look like. Now, the name aureus actually means gold, because when we grow Staph aureus on an agar petri dish, they form kind of these yellow goldish colonies here. So there we go, another name explaining what they look like. Alright guys, so I hope this helps, and please don't forget these very important rules about when you write the name of organisms, because from here on out you will lose a point if you do it incorrectly.